There's a document hidden in the Vatican archives for 400 years that predicts every single pope from the 12th century until the last pope in history. And according to this prophecy, we're running out of time. The Catholic Church never officially recognized it. They never condemned it either. They just let it disappear. For 4 centuries, nobody talked about it. Nobody published it. Nobody even knew it existed. Until 1595, when a Benedictine monk found it buried in the Vatican secret archives and decided the world needed to see what had been hidden. What he published changed everything. Because this prophecy doesn't just predict popes, it predicts the end of the papacy. The end of Rome and possibly the end of everything we know. This is the prophecy of Saint Malachy. And what I am about to show you will shake everything you thought you knew about the Catholic Church and the future of humanity. In 1139, an Irish archbishop named Malachy traveled to Rome. He wasn't famous, he wasn't powerful. He was just a religious leader from Armagh, Ireland, coming to meet with Pope Innocent II to discuss church matters. Standard diplomatic visit, nothing unusual. But while he was in Rome, something happened. According to the account written centuries later, Malachy experienced a vision. A revelation so powerful, so detailed, so specific that he immediately wrote it down. He saw the future, not just glimpses. Not vague symbols. He saw 112 popes. Every single one who would lead the Catholic Church from his time until the final pope who would preside over the destruction of Rome and the Last Judgment. He wrote down 112 short phrases in Latin, cryptic mottos, each one describing a future pope through symbols, wordplay, references to their names, birthplaces, or coats of arms. And then he handed the manuscript to Pope Innocent II and told him to keep it safe. And here's where it gets strange. The manuscript disappeared completely. For 447 years, nobody mentioned it. Not once. St. Bernard of Clairvaux, Malachy's close friend and biographer, wrote extensively about Malachy's life. He documented miracles. He recorded prophecies. But he never mentioned this list of popes. Not a single word. No other contemporary source mentions it either. It's as if the document never existed. As if Malachy never had the vision. As if the whole thing was erased from history. Until 1590, that's when everything changed. A cardinal in Italy wrote a private letter. His name was Giovanni Girolamo Albani, and he was preparing for the papal election. In his letter, he mentioned ancient prophecies about the papacy. Prophecies that described the next pope with the phrase, "De ror Shelley," from the dew of the sky. And he connected that phrase to himself, to his own name, believing it meant he would be elected. But here's the shocking part. 5 years later, in 1595, a Benedictine monk named Arnold Wyon published a massive book called Lignum Vitae, a history of the Benedictine order. And buried in the middle of that book, on pages 307 to 311, he included something extraordinary. The complete prophecy of Saint Malachy. All 112 mottos. All 112 popes. Including the exact phrase the cardinal had mentioned in his private letter years earlier. How did the cardinal know about a prophecy that hadn't been published yet? How did he reference a specific phrase from a document that supposedly hadn't been seen in 400 years? That's the question that haunts historians to this day. Either the prophecy really did exist in the Vatican archives, hidden and forgotten, and somehow a few insiders knew about it, or someone created it shortly before 1590 and the cardinal was in on it. But if it was a forgery, why? What was the purpose? And why did the church let it disappear for so long? Keep watching, because the answer is more disturbing than you think. Arnold Wyon claimed he found the manuscript in the Vatican secret archives. He said many people wanted to see it, that there was significant interest, but it had never been printed before. He published it alongside interpretations connecting each motto to historical popes who had already reigned. And those connections were shockingly accurate. Terrifyingly accurate. Like they were written by someone who actually knew these popes. The first motto was Ex Castro Tiberis, from a castle on the Tiber, and it perfectly matched Pope Celestine II, who was born in Città di Castello, which literally means city of the castle, located on the banks of the Tiber River. The motto for Pope Urban VIII was Lilium et Rosa. The lily and the rose. Urban was from Florence, and the symbol of Florence is a lily. His family coat of arms featured bees which gather pollen from lily and roses. Perfect match. The motto for Pope Benedict XII was Frigidus Abbas, cold abbot. Benedict, had been the abbot of a monastery at Fontfroide, which translates to cold spring. Exact match. One after another, the mottos fit. Birthplaces, family names, coats of arms, events during their reigns. All of it lining up with impossible precision. For the first 74 popes, from 1143 to 1590, the accuracy is undeniable. Which is exactly why historians believe it's a forgery. Because after 1590, after the prophecy was published, the accuracy drops dramatically. The mottos become vague, strained, generic, easy to fit almost any pope if you try hard enough. It's like whoever wrote it had access to perfect historical records up to 1590, and then had to guess about the future. But here's what they can't explain. Why would someone create a forgery that predicts the end of the papacy? Why would they risk publishing a document that suggests the Catholic Church will fall? That Rome will be destroyed? That there's a final pope coming who will preside over tribulation and judgment? That's not how you gain favor with the Church. That's how you get labeled a heretic. That's how you get silenced. And yet the Church never condemned it. They never officially approved it either. They just stayed silent, which is almost more disturbing. Because silence can mean many things. It can mean they don't believe it. Or it can mean they're afraid of what happens if they acknowledge it. And when you look at what the prophecy actually says about the final pope, you understand why the Church might want to stay quiet. Keep watching because what comes next will terrify you. Let's talk about what made these prophecies so accurate for the first 74 popes, because the level of detail is unsettling. Take Pope Innocent VII. His motto was De Meliori Sedere, from a better star. Innocent belonged to the Migliorati family. In Italian, miglior means better. The connection is direct, linguistic, undeniable, or Pope Paul II. His motto was De Cervo et Leone, from the stag and the lion. Paul's family name was Barbo, and his coat of arms featured a stag. He was also the Patriarch of Venice before becoming Pope, and Venice's symbol is the Lion of St. Mark. Stag and lion. Perfect. Pope Julius II. Julius Secundus. The motto was simply his name, no wordplay needed. Or consider Pope Marcellus II, whose motto was Defied Petri, from Peter's faith. Marcellus had been the cardinal of St. Peter's Basilica before his election. Again, exact match. One historian noted that for these early popes, the connections aren't vague or symbolic. They're literal, precise. Almost as if someone was looking at historical records and crafting perfect descriptions after the fact. Which brings us back to the central question. Was this prophecy written in 1139 by Saint Malachy, then lost for 400 years and rediscovered in 1590? Or was it created around 1590 by someone with access to historical archives who wanted to influence a papal election? The evidence points both ways. And that's what makes it so disturbing. Because if it's a forgery, it's the most elaborate, most detailed, most carefully constructed forgery in Catholic history. And if it's real, then everything it says about the future is still unfolding. Right now, in our lifetime. Let me show you what I mean. After the prophecy was published in 1595, popes kept coming, and people kept trying to match them to the mottos. Sometimes the connections worked, sometimes they didn't. But every once in a while, something happened that was so perfectly aligned with the prophecy that even skeptics had to pause. In 1958, Pope Pius XII died. The next motto in the prophecy was Pastor et Noda, shepherd and sailor. And immediately, cardinals started whispering. One cardinal in particular believed he was destined to be pope. His name was Francis Spellman, Archbishop of New York. Spellman was a firm believer in the prophecies of Saint Malachy. He took them seriously, studied them. And when he saw that the next pope was supposed to be a shepherd and sailor, he decided to make sure everyone knew he fit the description. So he did something incredible. Something so bold that it became a joke in Rome for decades. He hired a boat, filled it with sheep, and sailed it up and down the Tiber River, trying to fulfill the prophecy. Literally. Physically. Demonstrating that he was the shepherd and the sailor. It sounds absurd. And it was. But it shows you how seriously people took these prophecies. Even high-ranking cardinals in the Vatican believed there was something to them. But Spellman didn't become pope. Angelo Roncalli did. And Roncalli took the name John the 23rd. And here's where it gets eerie. John the 23rd had been the Patriarch of Venice before his election. Venice, a city built on water, a city of sailors. a city famous for boats and maritime trade. He was literally a shepherd, a religious leader, and a sailor, connected to one of the most nautical cities in the world. The prophecy fit perfectly, without anyone trying to force it, without anyone sailing sheep down the river. It just happened, and people noticed. They started paying closer attention. What about the next pope? The next motto was Flors Florum, flower of flowers. And Pope Paul VI, who succeeded John, had 3 fleurs de lis on his papal coat of arms. The fleur de lis is a stylized lily, a flower. 3 flowers on his official symbol. Flower of flowers. Again, the prophecy fit. The motto after that was De Meditate Luna, from the half moon. And Pope John Paul I was elected on August 26, 1978, during a half moon. He reigned for 33 days, about 1 lunar month. And then he died, suddenly, mysteriously. Many believe he was murdered. And his entire papacy occurred during a single moon cycle, from the half moon. The prophecy fit again. Then came John Paul II. His motto was De Labor Solis, from the labor of the sun. And here's where it gets strange. John Paul II was born on May 18, 1920, during a solar eclipse. And he was buried on April 8, 2005, during another solar eclipse. His entire life, from birth to burial, was framed by the labor of the sun. Solar events, cosmic alignments. The prophecy fit in a way that couldn't have been predicted in advance, because nobody in 1590 could have known when future solar eclipses would occur. Nobody could have known that a pope born during an eclipse would also be buried during one. But the prophecy seemed to know, and that's what makes people believe. Not because every motto fits perfectly, but because every once in a while something happens that's so precise, so uncanny, so impossible to explain that it feels like more than coincidence. It feels like the prophecy is real. And if the prophecy is real, then the final entry, the last pope, the one called Peter the Roman, is coming. And what the prophecy says about him is terrifying. Keep watching because we're about to dive into the final pope and what his reign means for all of us. Pope Benedict XVI was next. His motto was Gloria Olivae, the glory of the olive. Now, Benedict wasn't from a place associated with olives. He didn't have olives on his coat of arms. But the Benedictine order, which he's named after, has a branch called the Olivines. The olive branch is also a symbol of peace, and Benedict's papacy was marked by attempts to create dialogue and reconciliation. The connection is there, even if it's not as obvious as earlier popes, but here's what's important. Benedict was number 111 on the list, which means there's only one left. One more motto, one more pope, and then the prophecy ends. With fire, with judgment, with the destruction of Rome. The final entry doesn't have a short motto like the others. It has a full paragraph, a warning, a prophecy within the prophecy. And it's haunted the Catholic Church for 400 years. Because if it's true, we're living in the final days of the papacy, and the next pope, or the one after him, will be the last. Let me read you exactly what the prophecy says, word for word. As it was written in 1595, in persecution extrema, sacri Romani ecclesiae, sedebit Petrus Romanus, qui passit oves in multis tribulationibus, quibus transactus, civitas septicalis deruder, et judex tremendus judicabit populum suum. Finis, in English that translates to, in the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church there will reign Peter the Roman, who will feed his flock amid many tribulations, after which the seven-hilled city will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. Read that again. The seven-hilled city will be destroyed. Rome is known as the city of seven hills. It's one of Rome's most famous characteristics. 7 specific hills that define the ancient city. And the prophecy says that city will be destroyed. Not metaphorically. Not symbolically. Destroyed. During the reign of the final pope, a pope named Peter. Peter the Roman. And here's what makes this so disturbing. There has never been a pope named Peter since St. Peter himself, the first pope, the apostle who founded the church. For 2,000 years, no pope has taken that name because it's considered too sacred, too significant, too dangerous. Naming yourself Peter would be claiming equality with the founder of the church. It would be saying, I am the beginning and the end. I am the first and the last. No pope has dared. Until now, maybe. Because Pope Francis is the 112th pope since the prophecy began. He's the one sitting in the chair of Peter right now. And many believe he is Peter the Roman, but his name isn't Peter. His name is Francis. So how does that work? Keep watching because the explanation is more chilling than you think. Pope Francis was born Jorge Mario Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina. His father was Italian, an immigrant from the Piedmont region of northern Italy. So technically he is Roman by ancestry. His family came from Rome's cultural sphere. That's the first connection. The second connection is his name. When he was elected Pope in 2013, he chose the name Francis after St. Francis of Assisi. But St. Francis's baptismal name was Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone. Pietro. Peter. So Francis is named after someone whose name was Peter. That's the second connection. The third connection is that Francis is the Bishop of Rome. That's the Pope's official title. He's the Roman bishop, the Roman religious leader. So in a sense, every Pope is Roman, but Francis, with his Italian ancestry and his connection to Peter through his namesake, fits the description more than most. And here's what makes people nervous. The prophecy says Peter the Roman will feed his flock amid many tribulations. And Francis's papacy has been marked by crisis after crisis. Sexual abuse scandals, financial corruption in the Vatican Bank, accusations of covering up crimes, division within the church over doctrine and tradition, declining church attendance worldwide, the COVID pandemic forcing churches to close, political tensions with governments, internal rebellion from conservative cardinals who believe Francis is too liberal, tribulations, constant, ongoing, exhausting. The prophecy says after which the seven-hilled city will be destroyed. After the tribulations. After Francis, and that's what terrifies people. Because the prophecy doesn't say Francis is the last pope. It says Peter the Roman is the last pope. And there are two ways to interpret that. Either Francis is Peter the Roman, and the world ends during or shortly after his reign. Or Francis is the second to last pope, and the next one will be Peter the Roman. Some scholars point out that in the original 1595 publication, the line in persecution extrema sre sedebit appears as a separate sentence, a separate paragraph, which could mean it's referring to a different pope. Which would mean there's still one more pope coming. The actual Peter, the final one. The one who will witness the destruction of Rome. But here's the problem. And the church doesn't want to be in a position where they revalidating doomsday predictions or denying something that might be true. So they stay silent. And the prophecy continues to circulate, whispered about in seminaries, discussed in Catholic circles, analyzed by historians and theologians. Something the church definitely doesn't want people thinking about too deeply. And that's what the prophecy reveals about the nature of the papacy itself. Because if you believe the prophecy is real, written by Saint Malachy in 1139, then you have to accept that God revealed the future to him. That God showed him 112 popes. That God planned, from the beginning, for the papacy to end. That the Catholic Church, as an institution, is not eternal. It has a shelf life, a countdown and expiration date. And that contradicts one of the core beliefs of Catholicism. The Church teaches that it will last until the end of time, that the gates of hell will not prevail against it, that Christ promised the Church would endure forever. But if the prophecy is real, then forever has a deadline, and that deadline might be now. But there's more. Because this isn't the only time the Church has tried to suppress prophecies about its own end. Keep watching because the pattern of silence goes deeper than you think. The Catholic Church has a long history with private revelations and prophecies. Some are approved, like the apparitions of Mary at Fatima, Lourdes, and Guadalupe. Others are condemned, like messages that contradict church doctrine or promote heresy. But most exist in a gray area, not approved, not condemned, just ignored. And that's where the prophecy of the popes lives, in that gray zone of official silence. But here's the interesting part. The prophecy was influential enough that it affected papal elections. It influenced how cardinals voted, how they saw themselves and their potential role in history. Remember Cardinal Spellman sailing sheep down the Tiber? That wasn't just a personal eccentricity. That was a calculated attempt to fulfill prophecy, to align himself with divine will as expressed through Malachy. And he wasn't the only one. Throughout the 20th century, cardinals entering conclaves would look at the next motto in the prophecy and wonder, am I the one? Does this describe me? Will I fulfill the next prophecy? And that's power. Real, tangible power. Because even if you don't officially believe in the prophecy, if enough other people do, it affects their decisions, their votes, their perception of who should lead. It becomes a self-fulfilling mechanism. A prophecy that influences reality even if it's not divinely inspired. And the church knew this. They knew the prophecy had influence. So why didn't they condemn it? Why didn't they declare it heretical and forbid Catholics from discussing it? Because condemning it would give it more power, more attention. It would turn it into forbidden knowledge. And forbidden knowledge always becomes more attractive. So instead, they let it exist. Let it circulate. Let people talk about it in whispers. And the prophecy survived, generation after generation, through wars, through reforms, through scandals and crises. Always there, always waiting, and now, in 2024, we're at the end. Either Francis is Peter the Roman or the next pope is. Either way, according to the prophecy, we're in the final chapter, the last act, the closing scene. And what comes next is judgment, destruction, the end of Rome as we know it. But here's what nobody talks about. What if the prophecy isn't about the physical destruction of Rome? What if it's about something else? Something more symbolic? Something that's already happening? Keep watching because the truth might be more disturbing than the literal interpretation. When the prophecy says the seven-hilled city will be destroyed, most people imagine a literal apocalypse. Fire from the sky, earthquakes, war, the physical obliteration of Rome. But what if that's not what it means? What if the destruction is institutional, spiritual, cultural? Because if you look at the Catholic Church today, it's already collapsing. Not physically, but structurally. Churches are closing across Europe and North America. Attendance has plummeted. Entire dioceses are filing for bankruptcy due to sexual abuse settlements. Priests are leaving the ministry in record numbers. Seminaries are empty. The average age of priests is rising every year because young men aren't joining. In Ireland, once one of the most Catholic countries on earth, church attendance has dropped below 30%. In Germany, tens of thousands leave the church every year. In the United States, 1 in 10 adults is a former Catholic. They were raised in the faith and walked away. The church is hemorrhaging members, losing influence. But the church's authority, its power, its ability to shape societies and guide millions is crumbling. Collapsing from within, destroyed not by external enemies but by internal rot. By scandals that shattered trust. By doctrines that feel increasingly disconnected from modern life. By an institution that looks more like a relic of the past than a guide to the future. And maybe that's what the prophecy meant. Not the literal destruction of Rome, but the destruction of the Roman Catholic Church as a dominant spiritual force. A transformation so complete that the church as we know it ceases to exist. And Pope Francis is presiding over that transformation. Not because he wants to, but because he's the one in charge when it's happening. He's feeding his flock amid tribulations, trying to hold together an institution that's fragmenting, reforming, evolving, or dying, depending on your perspective. And after him, after Francis, what comes next? The prophecy says judgment. The dreadful judge will judge his people. And that could mean many things. It could mean the second coming of Christ. The literal end of the world. The final judgment of all humanity. Or it could mean something more immediate. A reckoning within the church. A moment when everything hidden is revealed. When every cover-up is exposed. when every abuse, every lie, every betrayal comes to light. And the people judge the institution that claimed to represent God. Maybe that's the judgment. Not divine, but human. A global loss of faith in an institution that betrayed the trust of millions. And once that judgment is complete, once the church is fully exposed and diminished, what's left? Does a new structure rise? Does Christianity continue in a different form? Or does the whole thing collapse? That's the question the prophecy doesn't answer, because it ends. Finis, the end. No explanation. No continuation. Just the end. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. Some researchers believe the prophecy originally had more entries. That the version published in 1595 was incomplete, abbreviated, edited. In 1624, another monk named Thomas Messingham republished the prophecy. But he made a change. He combined the last two entries into one. He took the separate paragraph, in persecution extrema sre sedebit, and merged it with Petrus Romanus. And that's the version most people know today. But in the original 1595 text, they were separate. Two different predictions. Which means there might be 113 popes, not 112, which means we might not be at the end yet. There might be one more coming after Peter the Roman, or Peter the Roman might not be the final pope at all. He might be the second to last. And the real final pope is unnamed. Unknown. Still waiting. And nobody knows which interpretation is correct. Because the original manuscript, if it ever existed, is gone, lost, hidden, or destroyed. All we have is the 1595 publication and the 1624 revision, and centuries of debate about which one is accurate. And that brings us back to the central mystery. Who wrote this prophecy? If it was Saint Malachy in 1139, why did it disappear for 400 years? Why did his closest friend, Saint Bernard, never mention it? Why is there no record of it anywhere until 1590? And if it was forged around 1590, who did it? And why? And how did they create something so detailed, so accurate for past popes, and so influential for future ones? Some historians believe it was Arnold Wyon himself, the monk who published it. That he created it to influence the 1590 papal election. That he wanted Cardinal Girolamo Simoncelli to win, and he thought a prophecy identifying Simoncelli as the next pope would sway voters. But Simoncelli didn't win. And if Wyon created the prophecy, why did he attribute it to Saint Malachy? Why not claim it as his own revelation? Why not say God showed him the future popes? Attributing it to someone who died 400 years earlier doesn't give it more authority. If anything, it invites skepticism. Because people immediately ask, where was this for 400 years? And Wyon's answer was vague. He said he found it in the archives, that it had been forgotten. That many people wanted to see it, but it had never been printed. That's not a strong defense. That's an admission that the document's provenance is questionable. So why did the church allow it to be published? Why didn't they shut it down immediately? Because in 1595, the Catholic Church was in crisis. The Protestant Reformation had split Christianity. Wars of religion were tearing Europe apart. The Council of Trent had just concluded, trying to reform the church and respond to Protestant criticisms. The church was defensive, reactionary, trying to maintain authority in a world that was questioning everything. And in that context, a prophecy predicting the future popes might have seemed useful. It reinforced the idea that God had a plan, that the papacy was divinely ordained, that the future was known and controlled. Even if the prophecy predicted an eventual end, that end was far away. Generations away, not an immediate threat. So the church let it exist, let it be published, let it circulate, and it became part of Catholic culture, part of the mystical tradition surrounding the papacy, a curiosity, a legend, a story people told. But here's the twist. What if the prophecy is working exactly as intended? Not as a prediction of the future, but as a script, a narrative that guides decisions, that influences conclaves, that shapes how popes see their role. What if the prophecy isn't predicting the future? What if it's creating it? Keep watching, because this is where it gets really disturbing. Think about it. For over 400 years, cardinals entering conclaves have known about this prophecy. They've read the next motto. They've thought about whether it applies to them or to someone else. And consciously or unconsciously, that affects their decisions. If the next motto is, pastor and sailor, cardinals from maritime regions have an advantage. If the motto involves flowers, someone with flowers on their coat of arms seems destined. The prophecy doesn't predict the future. It influences the present. It creates a framework that voters use to evaluate candidates, and candidates use to present themselves. It's not divine revelation. It's psychological manipulation. A self-fulfilling prophecy that guides behavior toward predetermined outcomes. And maybe that was the point. Maybe whoever created the prophecy understood human psychology, understood how people make decisions under pressure, understood that giving people a narrative to follow makes them more likely to follow it. And now we're at the end of that narrative. Peter the Roman, the final pope, the destruction of Rome, and everyone's watching, waiting, wondering, will it happen? Is Francis the last, or is there one more coming? And what does it mean if the prophecy is right? Because if Rome falls, if the papacy ends, if the Catholic Church collapses, what rises in its place? Does Christianity survive? Does faith survive? Or do we enter an age where organized religion loses its grip entirely? Where spirituality becomes individual, personal, disconnected from institutions and hierarchies? Maybe that's the real prophecy. Not the end of the world, but the end of the Church's dominance, the end of religious authority as we've known it for 2,000 years. A transformation so complete that humanity has to reimagine what faith looks like. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe institutions need to die so something new can grow. Maybe prophecies like this exist to prepare us for change, to help us accept that nothing lasts forever, not empires, not churches, not even the papacy. The prophecy of Saint Malachy has been called many things: a hoax, a forgery, a divine revelation, a psychological tool, a historical curiosity. But whatever it is, it's survived for over 400 years. It's influenced papal elections. It's shaped how millions of Catholics see the future. And it's forced the Church to confront uncomfortable questions about its own mortality. Because the prophecy doesn't just predict popes, it predicts an ending. And endings terrify institutions built on the promise of eternity. The Catholic Church teaches that it will last forever. But the prophecy of the Pope says otherwise. It says there's a final Pope coming, a final crisis, a final judgment. And after that, nothing, finis, the end. And maybe the reason the Church never condemned the prophecy is because deep down, they know it's true. Not in the literal sense, but in the symbolic sense. That all things end. That even the most powerful institutions are temporary. That time claims everything eventually. And the prophecy is just a reminder. A memento mori for an institution that forgot it's mortal. So what happens next? If Francis is Peter the Roman, then we're in the final act. The tribulations are here. The destruction, whether literal or symbolic, is coming. And the judgment, whether divine or human, will follow. And if Francis isn't Peter the Roman, if there's one more pope coming, then we're even closer than we think. Because that next pope will be the last. The one who witnesses the end. The one who presides over the collapse. Either way, the clock is ticking. The prophecy is nearing its conclusion. And the world is watching, waiting, to see if a 12th century Irish bishop really saw the future. Or if 400 years of belief created its own reality. If this story fascinated you, leave a like on this video. Subscribe because next week we're exploring another forbidden prophecy that religious authorities tried to erase from history. A prediction so dangerous that those who spoke it were silenced permanently. And drop in the comments. Do you think the prophecy of the popes is real? Is Francis the last pope? Or is there one more coming? What do you think happens when the prophecy ends? Because that's the thing about prophecies. They don't just tell the future, they shape it. They influence how we see the world, how we make decisions, how we prepare for what's coming. And whether the prophecy of Saint Malachy is divine revelation or human invention, it's done its job. It's made us think, made us question, made us wonder what comes next. And maybe that's the real power of prophecy. Not predicting the future, but forcing us to confront it. To ask hard questions, to imagine endings, and to decide what we'll do when those endings arrive. The prophecy of the Pope says the end is near, not the end of the world, but the end of an era, the end of an institution, the end of a way of understanding faith and authority that's defined Western civilization for 2,000 years. And whether that end comes with fire and judgment or with quiet decline and transformation, the prophecy says it's coming, ready or not, believed or not, acknowledged or not. Acknowledged or not. The final pope is either here or on his way. And after him, according to a document that's haunt.